Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the history and the origin of the werewolf myths, as well as to some real-life explanations as to what is actually occurring here, because it's quite the phenomena. The many ancient cultures, I am certain, have come up with the idea of the werewolf on their own over the millennia, right? And it may be that the root of the werewolf myth is not ancient Greece, but the ancient Greek root of the myth is the first time we see it in writing, and it is going to be the werewolf myth that ends up spreading the most and really interacting with a lot of the European world, including the Middle East and parts of Asia. Lycanthropy, right? Lycanthropy. It's known in popular myth as this illness, which has been purported by some medical doctors, right? That this is an actual psychological condition, that is, one believing they can turn into a wolf. We'll get into that later. But lycanthropy has its beginnings with King Lycan of Arcadia, which is a region in Greece. According to the myth of the King Lycan, there is a tribe named the Nuri, which is based in northeast Scythia, which we would know as Scythia. The Scythian tribe migrates to Arcadia and sets up shop there, eventually forming its own kingdom within Greece. They're going to make a cult, a cult that is a perversion of the Greek religion, with its figurehead a wolf version of Zeus known as Zeus Lycaeus. They are going to be practicing human sacrifice and cannibalism, which is obviously very much frowned upon by the Greeks at large. They're going to be sacrificing people, primarily children, to this wolf version of Zeus. The story goes is that Zeus is horrified by this and smites them with his thunderbolts and kills them all. According to these myths, the ritual involved eating children, and the act of cannibalism would turn the person into a wolf. The idea of this ritual being that these participants willingly wish to turn themselves into such creatures. There are several versions of this myth. One is that Zeus appears to them in person, and King Lycan wishes to test whether Zeus is an actual god or not. And so he sacrifices someone to Zeus and tries to offer Zeus the entrails of the sacrificed victim. Zeus is horrified and therefore turns him into a wolf. Most versions of the story, however, believe that they are already turning themselves into wolves and eating people, and that Zeus is punishing them for those actions. Now, there have been human sacrifices found, evidence of that found at the site. There have been human remains which have obviously been sacrificed, and there's even evidence of cannibalism. So this story may have some truth to it. The events occurring in Arcadia revolving around this cult to Wolf Lycanus, Zeus Lycanus, is going to be mentioned quite a bit. Pausanias is going to mention a man named Demarchus who was turned into a wolf after tasting the entrails of a human child sacrificed to Wolf Zeus Lycanus. Apparently he was restored to human form 10 years later and went on to become an Olympic champion. Don't know if that's true. According to Pausanias, many men were transformed into wolves during the sacrifices to Zeus Lycanus since the time of King Lycan. According to him, if they abstained from tasting human flesh while being wolves, they would be restored to their human form 9 years later. Now, if they ate someone, they would remain wolves forever. This is going to be a very popular thing. It's going to be mentioned a lot by many Greek writers and even Roman ones later on the subject. So I won't get into too much detail on those, but the idea of someone abstaining from human flesh for a number of years, they could return back to their human form. The werewolf could. Virgil is going to propose a different method. He's going to write of a man named Morris who used herbs and poisons to turn himself into a wolf. Pliny the Elder is going to write a different version of how men might turn themselves to wolf in Arcadia, where the phenomena is occurring. He says that once a year a man was chosen by lot from the clan, and that the chosen man was escorted to a marsh where he would hang his clothes onto an oak tree and then would swim across the marsh and transform into a wolf, joining an actual wolf pack for 9 years and living as a wolf. If during these 9 years he avoided tasting human flesh, he returned to the same marsh, swam back, he would return back into a human 9 years later. Ovid is also going to write of people roaming the woods of Arcadia as in wolf form as well. Augustine of Hippo is going to write later on that it is very generally believed that by certain witches' spells, men may be turned into wolves. So we can see that in the classical world, the idea of werewolves is a very popular one, right? And the church is certainly going to notice this, the early church is. And in fact, pretty much at the very beginning of the church, the Council of Ancra in the 4th century is going to write the Capitulum Episcopi, which is the church's doctrinal text on witchcraft, magic, werewolves, etc. It's going to say that whoever believes that anything can be transformed into another species or likeness, except by God himself, is beyond doubt an infidel. As in, if you believe this stuff, you're a pagan. No Christian should believe in magic or the ability of magic. Now, that's going to go against popular opinion, obviously, when we think of, certainly we think of the witch trials later. For a very long period, the early church, all the way into the end of the Middle Ages, is going to have the opinion that Christians shouldn't believe in the power of magic. Magic isn't real, it's just a bunch of pagan nonsense and superstition. The popular trope was pagans are without God, they're not against God, right? But they're not against God, right? Just leave them alone kind of mentality, let them do their own thing. This is going to change, though, when we get into the 1300s. It's going to become, if these people are without God, they're with the devil, right? So, but for a very long period of time, that's going to be the church's thinking. And we can see that here, evidence of that here based on their assertion and the belief of werewolves. And it's probably for this reason that the werewolf myth is going to remain relatively dormant for much of the Dark Ages and isn't going to resurrect itself in Europe until the late 1500s. There's going to be a man named Peter Stump in 1589 who is going to confess to being a werewolf. Now, if you're aware, the witch fervor really kicks off in the 1550s and ends in the 1750s. Peter Stump's confession to being a werewolf kicks off a mini werewolf craze. It's going to be much smaller than the witch fervor, but is going to continue from 1589 on into the 1750s, primarily in the same regions the witch craze is occurring, which would be Germany, Switzerland, France. An individual could become a werewolf by various means. It could be a magic item, typically jewelry, or a cloak, or a cowl. It could be a spell or a curse, as in Either the werewolf has cast a spell upon himself or has been cursed by the magic of someone or something else. In the ancient Greek period, naturally, if somebody hadn't been turned into a wolf by a god, such as in one version of the story, Lycan by Zeus, then everyone else literally acting in this way was purposely becoming a wolf, right? They could be born a werewolf. Now, this is a Middle Ages trope, but they could be born a werewolf if you were born with hair on your head, right, as a baby, because that's not as common. That person might be suspected of being a werewolf. That baby might be suspected of such. Now, it didn't mean they killed the baby. It's just that they were superstitious about it. Another thing was a unibrow. The baby was born with a unibrow, or the person had a unibrow. They might be a suspicious character that could or may not be a werewolf. But the most common explanation in the Middle Ages, once we get into the 1300s, right, is that the person who's a werewolf had to have made a pact with a demon or Lucifer himself. And Lucifer himself is the most common explanation for someone becoming a werewolf. Now, we saw earlier that there were certain ways that the curse could be broken. The abstaining from human flesh for a certain period of time, once in wolf form, could allow you to be the curse of the werewolf to be broken. The other way is that I've read is to take the back of a knife and bash it against the individual's forehead. This would somehow cure them of lycanthropy. A little bit similar to the idea of a lobotomy, it seems, but some of the people we're going to mention next probably could have used one. Purported werewolves. This is where the fun or the ugliness begins. We're going to talk about the idea of a medical version of lycanthropy, because there are individuals who really believe themselves to be werewolves and commit heinous acts because of it. When we think of King Lycan in the beginning, the genesis of the werewolf myth, how is he becoming a werewolf? Cannibalism, right? He's eating people. Either version, any of the versions of the Greek story involve these individuals who are werewolves being cannibals, right? This linkage here isn't going to go away. It's going to be inseparable. Cannibalism and werewolfism are going to be inseparable, right? And we're going to see that soon. When it comes to the werewolf hunts, there's going to be several differences. There's going to be several things of note here, and differences from the witch fervor. One, it's estimated that 25% of people who were accused of being witches that were put to death were men, right? So only about 25%. It's going to be a majority women. This is not the case with those accused of werewolves. If you watch our video on witchcraft, you'll see that there are gender stereotypes coming into play. It's not necessarily sexism that's occurring or a war against women, but it's the gender stereotype taking place that is causing male or female to be accused of certain specific things. When it comes to the werewolf, the vast majority of those accused and put to death are men. 99%, right? If I had to pop a number out of my head, I would honestly say 100% of the people accused of werewolfism or being a werewolf were men. I would say 100%, but I'm not going to be that absolute. I'll say 99% of them. So that is one big difference. With witches, it's usually women in their stereotypes. With werewolves, it's men. The other thing that is a big difference and something to note is that there is going to be a correlation with an actual physical crime committed that's actually probably true, right? When we look at witches, it's a lot of nonsense and something that is probably not true when we look at the vast majority of the accused witches during this witch craze. When we look at the werewolves, though, accused werewolves, there's actually a lot of evidence that these people were probably guilty of cannibalism, or at the very least being a serial killer. All right, so that is going to be something, and there's obviously going to be innocent individuals accused as well, but there's going to be a lot of guilty ones, and we'll get into those now. So relax, and I will regale you with some stories of people who were accused of being werewolves. Just allow me to put on my relaxing storyteller voice. In 1589, Peter Stump claimed to be a werewolf and have a pact with the devil. After being captured and stretched out onto a rack before the real torture could even begin, he immediately confessed to having practiced black magic since he was 12 years old. He claimed that the devil had given him a magical belt or girdle, which enabled him to metamorphose into the likeness, and we'll quote him, of a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which in the night sparkled like fire, a mouth great and wide, with most sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body, and mighty paws. Removing the belt, he said, made him transform back to his human form. Being threatened with torture, he confessed to killing and eating 14 children, 2 pregnant women as well, whose fetuses he ripped from their wounds. And we'll quote him here, ate their hearts, panting hot and raw. He would describe these fetuses as dainty morsels. One of the 14 children he killed was his own son, whose brain he was reported to have eaten. This man's going to be incredibly guilty of cannibalism and of being a serial killer. The confession was not forced, right, by torture. And it was very creative and disturbing confession that would imply guilt. So we do see here he is going to kick off the werewolf hunt craze. And it's very likely that Peter Stump was an insane individual who really did believe himself to be a werewolf. When we talk about medical lycanthropy, we're going to see this throughout a lot of these guys, that they really genuinely believe themselves to be werewolves. The Werewolf of Dole. A fellow named Gilles Garnier was a reclusive hermit living outside the town of Dole. Several children had gone missing, and villagers reportedly spotted a wolf hovering over the corpse of a dead child, while others said it was actually this hermit, Garnier. Garnier was arrested, and he confessed the crimes. He said that while he was in the forest one night trying to find food for himself and his wife, a specter appeared to him, offering to ease his troubles, and gave him an ointment that would allow him to transform into a wolf, making it easier for him to catch food for himself and his wife. Garnier would confess to having killed at least 4 children between the ages of 9 and 12. There are numerous examples here, but generally speaking, he would kill the child, brutally attack them, tear open their belly, rip them in pieces, and bring some of the flesh, usually a leg, back to his wife for her to eat. Garnier was found guilty of crimes of lycanthropy and of witchcraft and was burned at the stake in 1574. It's important to note this trial was not done by the church. They didn't do that in France. This was done by secular authorities. Right? Peter Bergot and Michael Verdun, 1521. They were French serial killers who were said to be werewolves. Peter Bergot, at his trial in 1521, claimed that he was out searching for his lost sheep one night. 3 men in black approached him. They demanded that he renounce God, but it said that in return they would make him rich and give him back his lost sheep. Burgot agreed to this deal with the devil. Soon after, Burgot met Michael Verdun, who claimed to be a shapeshifter able to transform into a werewolf. Verdun supposedly took Burgot to a meeting of warlocks where they stripped naked and applied a strange salve all over their bodies. Burgot claimed that they morphed into wolves and started murdering people throughout the French countryside. Both men confessed their crimes, which included eating a 9-year-old girl after breaking her neck. They were convicted and burned at the stake. Don't know if that one's true. Hans the Werewolf. In 1651, he was brought before the court accused of being a werewolf at the age of 18. He confessed that he had hunted as a werewolf for 2 years. He claimed that he had gotten the body of a wolf by a man in black. When asked by the judges if his physical body took part in the hunt, or if only his soul was transmuted, Hans confirmed that he had found dog's teeth marks on his own leg, which he had received while a werewolf. Further asked whether he felt himself to be a man or a beast, he said that he felt himself to be a beast. He was sentenced, the man in black was believed to have been Satan. The court determined, and he was judged guilty of witchcraft and sentenced to death. Theiss, this is a funnier one. An 80-year-old man named Theiss confessed to being a werewolf who, with other werewolves, regularly went to hell 3 times a year to fight the witches and wizards of Satan to ensure a good harvest. The court tried to make Theiss confess that he had made a pact with the devil and that the werewolf was in the service of Lucifer. They did not succeed, and he was sentenced to a whipping of 10 lashes. This is in 1692. So we can see here that if there wasn't bodies, if there wasn't evidence of crime, simply believing that you were a werewolf wasn't necessarily going to get you killed or in any real trouble. The Werewolf of Chalons, which is in France. There's not much known about this fellow. He was a tailor living in Paris, and he allegedly lured children into his shop so that he could torture and murder them. He then carefully carved them up and ate them for dinner. To capture even more children, it is said he would transform into a wolf and stalk his victims in the forest at night. When his shop was searched, a barrel full of bleached children's bones was discovered. He confessed to his crimes and showed no remorse at the trial, even going into explicit detail about what he had done to the children. He was burned at the stake for witchcraft and lycanthropy, and court officials destroyed all court documents relating to the case. They did not want this man's name to be remembered. They considered what he had done so abominable, they wanted him erased from the history books. Several other smaller cases. A man named Matthias Stoop was executed in 1657 after being accused of tormenting the area as a werewolf. And he was forced to confess that he had been given a wolf skin by the devil, right? So we do this trope, right, of the devil being involved in the transformation. The last of the Renaissance era, the Beast of Gabadoon, which if you've heard about any real werewolves, this is probably the one. It was a man-eating animal, which many thought to be a wolf or werewolf. It killed somewhere between 100 and 500 people. It was generally described as a large canine wolf with tall, lean frame. It was said to be the size of a cow or a calf or a horse. After hundreds of attacks over a several-year period, the French government became involved in the hunt for the beast. The beast was shot dead finally in 1767. The wolf's body was then brought to a castle in France where it was stuffed. A surgeon's post-mortem report, which was transcribed by a notary Marin and is known as the Marin Report, describes the beast. That upon being opened, the animal's stomach was shown to contain the remains of its last victim, a human person. Marin reported this animal, which seemed to us to be a wolf, but extraordinary and very different by its figure and its proportion of the wolves we see in this country. This is what we have certified by more than 300 people from all around who have come to see him. We're going to get now into the modern era and cases of werewolves that are not so refutable. A man named Manuel Blanco Romasanta in 1844 in Spain. He was born in 1809. In the first few years of his life, he was raised as a girl. Doctors didn't discover that he was male until he was 6 years old. So already things are a little odd. After becoming a widower in 1833, he began working as a travel guide in Spain and Portugal. He was suspected of killing a constable in Leon in 1844. He fled the country and became a fugitive. His murder count only grew after that. Several of the women who had hired him as tour guides disappeared along with their children, and he covered up their absences by writing letters to their families explaining that they had moved. Finally, people caught on, and he was accused of killing the missing people and making their soap out of their fat. At his trial, Romasanta claimed that he had been cursed to transform into a wolf. In his animal form, he would go on a 5-day killing sprees before returning to his human body. The court, surprisingly, took his claim seriously and asked him to prove it by turning into a wolf in front of their eyes. Romasanta, however, explained that the curse lasted for 13 years and had just expired the week before. He was acquitted for some of these murders after it was proven that a few victims had died in real wolf attacks. But he was convicted on 9 charges and sentenced to death. Queen Isabella of Spain, however, commuted his execution because a doctor hoped to treat his lycanthropy, but he died in prison a few months later. Georgia, the United States. We're getting into America now. Emily Isabella Burt, known as the Werewolf of Georgia, she returned from a semester in Europe, looking ill, suffering from insomnia, growing hair in odd places, and her teeth had become pointed like fangs. After some of the local livestock had been killed, farmers shot what they thought was a wolf. The next morning, Emily Isabella awoke with a bullet in her hand. Her mother shipped her off to Paris to be treated by a doctor who specialized in lycanthropy. The attacks on the livestock ended, and when Emily Isabella completed her treatment, she returned to Georgia just fine and lived there till 1911. Albert Fish, this is our last killer we're going to talk about today. Albert Fish is one of the most notorious serial killers in history, known as the Brooklyn Vampire, the Boogeyman, and the Werewolf of Wisteria. Before he became a full-blown murderer and cannibal, he reportedly liked to eat raw meat during every full moon. Later, he began preying on children. He met one of his victims, Grace Budd, after responding to an employment ad that Grace's brother had placed in the paper. He went there with the intention of offering the boy a job, luring him away, and then killing him, but he changed his mind when he saw Grace. He said he'd love to take her to his niece's birthday party, and her parents agreed to let go with Fish. They never saw Grace again. Years later, her family received a mysterious letter detailing how the writer had killed Grace and consumed her flesh. The letter was later traced back to Fish, and he was arrested. The exact number of his victims is unknown. In conclusion, we can see that since the original Greek myths of the werewolf, the idea of the werewolf has been inseparable from cannibalism. And if we think about this, the wolf was the greatest devourer of humans in pre-modern Europe. Okay? Thousands, as high as thousands, could be killed by wolves every year. It is therefore unsurprising that someone who devoured humans would be associated with a wolf, right? Men don't eat men, the theory would go. So what could cause this man to eat someone? Well, he couldn't have. He's a man. Unless he turned into a wolf. To these people, that was a logical explanation. And here we have the myth born of the werewolf. Unsurprisingly, it is not uncommon for a cannibal to believe that even they themselves are a werewolf. I suppose to many of them, it offered the only explanation available as to their hunger for human flesh. This surprisingly continues to this day. There are cannibals and serial killers that I could have mentioned in this video in the last decade who believe themselves to be werewolves. There have been many explanations as to why one would believe themselves to be a werewolf. The only one that I've given any merit to would be that there is a real medical condition, although a rare one, known as lycanthropy, that causes individuals to really think they are transforming into an animal and then go on killing sprees. This could be true, and I'm not unwilling to consider the validity of it, because we certainly see time and time again men killing other people and eating them who are confessing to being wolves. I think it is very possible that these dangerously insane individuals relate to the idea of there being a beast inside of them, right? These individuals who have hunger for human flesh, who want to kill and to eat, they identify with the idea of a beast, right? That's something they can readily relate to. They are doing beastly things after all, and they know that, right? A lot of them will know that. So the idea or the concept of there being a beast inside of them or living within them, or that they transform into a beast, so for example, during their bloodlust or rage, but something they can identify with. So the werewolf is something that these types of insane, dangerously insane individuals can easily identify with. Folks, I hope you enjoyed the history of the werewolf we presented today. Tales of purported werewolves, of cannibalism, of the origin of the werewolf, types of ways people could turn into werewolves, and of course a few ways such a spell could be broken. In modern times, the werewolf is now, if you're familiar with the tropes, can be wounded via silver, as really all undead could. That was a medieval trope. That they transform on a full moon into a wolf, and after that night, they return to their human form. We can see, and the curse of the werewolf is spread via biting. We don't see examples of biting turning someone into a werewolf, but we do see certainly examples of a combined elements to create the modern mythology, right? Sleeping outside on a full moon could turn someone into a wolf, right? That's something they're going to borrow from ancient times for this modern mythology, as well as many, many other things, obviously, that we mentioned today. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this and this video. Be sure to look around on the channel. There's plenty of other interesting videos that we've put up, and there will be more to come. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.